Hello everybody and welcome. This is Roland from Graphic in Motion. In this tutorial I want to show you how to create this nice 3D title animation. We will use Video Copilot's 3D Element plugin, and I will also show you some techniques how to composite 3D particles from Trapcode Particular into the scene, and I will also show you how you can create flares that interact with the 3D elements with Video Copilot's optical flares. So let's get started. I want to create a new project and I want to save my last one. I don't want to save my last one. And I will create a new composition and I will work with 720p for this tutorial and call the composition main and set it to 10 seconds of duration. And first of all, I want to create a background, so I will create a new solid and call it BG for background, make it comp size, and then I will go to my effects and presets and put in ramp, because I want my background to be a ramp, and I want it to be a radial ramp, and I want to change the color in the middle, and this should be some grayish blue. Okay, and the outer color should be some darker grayish blue or even nearly black. Okay, and now I want to expand this flare, and you see that now we get these small aberration lines here, and I don't want this, so I change my composition settings from 8 bits per channel to 16 bits per channel, and now it's better, but I really want to be sure that I have no lines here at all, so I will go to my effects and presets and select noise, drag it on my background layer and set it to 2%. This gives it a little bit of a noise and gets rid of all the lines. Okay, now we want to create our title. Therefore I will select my text tool and just type my title in motion, and I want to position it approximately in the middle, so I will just blend in my title action safe guides and eyeball the middle. And now I can create another layer, and this time I call it element 3D, make it blue. Okay, comp size, and now I just also want to make this blue. And I also will set my background to yellow, so that it's just a little bit organized. Now I go to my effects and type in element, and drag it on my element 3D layer. And now I have to tell element that we want to work with my text layer here. So I have to go to the custom layers and custom text and masks and tell element that my first path layer will be my graphic in motion text. And now I can go into my scene setup and I have to press the extrude button, and you see now element brings in my text here, and it's already extruded in 3D space, but you can see that we have some problems, so I have to change some values here. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the bevel copies from 1 to 2, because I want to have 2 bevels on this object. And now I will go to my first bevel and I will deactivate the second one, and I will change some values here. So I want the expand edges to decrease, because I want the elements of the typography to be really visible. So I will set it, let's say, to minus 0.2, and I will decrease the bevel size here, and let's say to 0.2 or something. Yeah, and now you see I have nice gaps between my font, and I also have a light bevel here. And I also want the bevel to be in the background, so I will check the bevel backside box here. And I think that these elements are a little bit too big, so I will go to my extrusion model and just change the bevel scale to 0.5. That should be okay. And now I will change some material options here because I want this to have a black glossy look. So I will go to my basic settings and change the diffuse color from white to black. And now I have to change my background color with this switch here just to see something. And I want to change my specular, and I want to turn on the specular and set it to, let's say, 1. I want this to be really specular. And you see now it reflects the light in a nice way, but I want the shininess to be a little bit more intense, so I will set this to 1.2. Let's see what this does. It's kind of cool. Okay, that's it for our first bevel. So now I will go to my second bevel and just activate it. And I will also change some settings here. So first of all, I want to change the expand edges because it's just too big. Let's set it to -0.6. Take a look. Well, it looks quite good. Maybe -0.7. No, that's a little bit too much, so let's stay with -0.6. And I want the extrusion to be a little bit bigger because I want this to stand out from my other bevel. So I set it to 1.3, and if you take a look here now, it's just standing out here. But I want it to stand out at the front and at the back. So I will first of all check bevel backside, and now we'll just change the C offset to minus value and eyeball it so that it's more or less the same front and in the back. And I kind of like it, but it's just a little bit too much. So I will set the extrusion to 1.2. And now I have to change my C value here a little bit. Come on. That's good. And I also want the bevel size. I want to decrease the bevel size because I think the bevel size is just too big. So let's set it to. And now again, I have to adjust the C value here. So I think -8, -9, -10 is good. Now I have mine. Font looks quite cool. Another thing that I will change is a little bit the size of the edges. So let's say -0.65. Just make it a little bit smaller. Okay. And now we'll change my color here. Diffuse color. I will take my yellow, my gravity motion yellow, just eyeball the color, and I will take my shine options, specular options, so 1 and 1.2, set it to 1 and 1.2. Let's see what this does. It creates some nice reflections or nice specular on my material. Very good. A very important thing we have to do before we go back to our composition or our animation is to change the group assignment here. As a default, you see that the extrusion model is assigned to group 1, but I also want it to be assigned to group 2. And why I do this, you will see in 1 minute. So let's just check the 2 here, so that 1 and 2 are selected, and go back to our After Effects interface. And now we have to increase the size a little bit. You know, Element just decreased the size of my title, so I will go to group 1 and to particle look and just increase the size here. And let's say I want this to be approximately, let's just put in 15 as a straight value. And as you can see, we have now 2 copies of my title here. So the first one is group 1 and the second one is group 2. And I want group 2, of course, to have the same size as group 1. So I will just change this to 15. What else I want to do is to enable the animation engine now. The animation engine allows me to animate between the 2 groups. So I can animate from group 1 to group 2, and I will use this feature to animate the single elements and to form my title. So let's just enable this for now. And when I enable this, now only group 1 is visible, and I can change between them with the animation switch here. So now I can just get rid of my graphic in motion text, or just disable it for now. And I will bring in a new camera. Make it 20 millimeters. I want this to be a wide angle shot to give it more depth. You know, you can see the 3D extrusion better with a wide angle shot. And I will also take a new null object and make it 3D and parent my camera to this. It would just be my cam control. So I rename it cam control. And now I will just color them to something, just that it's organized. And now we will do the animation of our elements here. So I will go to Element and I will go to my Group 1 settings, and I will expand my multi-object option here and enable multi-object. And what this does is Element takes a look at all the single elements now. It doesn't use my graphic in motion as one title. It really takes all these parts from my font, and that's why I use the AG book font. I will put a link into the description of the file, because it has gaps between these elements, and you will see what happens when I change something here. So the first thing I want to change is the random rotation. So I go to rotation random and really put this up to something like 1.5 or whatever. And you see that all the single elements, not all of them, the N is still one letter, but the C is broken into 3 pieces and so on. So we have some pieces, and it looks really cool. The next thing I want to do is to scatter this thing. So I go to my scatter value here and just turn this up, and let's say 20 or something. That looks quite good. And I want to give it a little bit more X scatter so that it's a little bit far away. Let's say 45 here, and set scatter so that my parts are nearer to my camera. Let's say 65 or whatever, and that's maybe a little bit too much. So let's bring this in again. Oh, this is quite good. Okay, so another thing I want to do is to add a little bit more depth, and therefore I can use the render settings inside Element, and I can use the fog option, and I just will enable it, and we will see what this does. At first I have to select the color of my fog, and I want the fog to be in the same color as my background, so I select it, and now you see what it does. It fades out our elements that are far away from the camera, and that's really cool. But I want the title to be visible in the end, so I have to take a look at my camera settings. And my camera position is at -711 in set space. So I want to be sure that my fog starts behind this point. So I just take my range, and the start distance I will set to 715, so it starts behind my title, because in the end my title would be exactly 711 points away from the camera. So I can say 720, you know, just to be sure. And I want the range to be a little bit narrower so that the elements fade off a little bit more. Let's say 1000 is cool. And now you see the elements in the back, they are nearly invisible, and this creates a nice depth. Maybe this is a little bit too much, and we set it to 1200. Okay, and now I will just show you how to animate this now. So we will go into our, I will do it here, it's better. I will go into our animation engine, and I will just set a keyframe at 1 second at 0% of the animation, and I will move forward 5 seconds to 6 seconds, and I will set this to 100. And you see what's happening. My titles are forming, and the letters fly back to their original position. And this only with 2 keyframes. That's very useful. So I just want to change the keyframe interpolation to Bezier. And now I will also add some rotation here. So I take my cam control and press R to reveal the rotation. And let's say we want to make 5 seconds long. And we want to rotate it 360 degrees, so 1 rotation. And you see, now we have a nice animation. And also change this to Bezier. And now we will start to make this look a little bit more interesting. So what I need is some light. Therefore I just create a new light. And at first I want to have an ambient light that will be our fill light. And I call it fill, and make this just plain white and set the intensity down to 25. The next light I want to create is some kind of key light. So I will call it key light, and this should be a spotlight, and the intensity should be 100, and the color should be a slightly bluish color. Really only a little bit. Okay, and oops, sorry, I made a mistake. I don't want it to be a spotlight, I want it to be a point light. Yes, okay. And now I will just change to 2 views horizontal to position. This is the top view here, and I want to position, it helps me to position my light a little bit better, because I want the light to be at this side, and I want it to be a little bit higher, I guess. So let's see what this does here. Why? I still want this visible, this glance here. So, okay, we'll leave it like this. And I want to create another light, which will be my backlight. So I call it back. And this should be a little bit warmer, so a slightly yellowish color. And also point light with the intensity of 100, and I will set this light just right here at the back, and I will move it up to the top a little bit. I just have to check it in my one view because I want this to create some nice reflections on my elements, and as you can see, our key light does its job quite well, but I think that our backlight, which I have to correct a little bit, is not in the right position. So I will go to my position and change it and see what's happening here. Oh, let's increase it a little bit. Now we can see something here. Let's take a look at the end. And my backlight is a little bit too low, I guess. So I want this to be up here somewhere. Oh yes, and move it in a little bit. And now you see that it's taking the, it makes the effect that I'm searching for, to create some kind of reflection or specularity from the top here. So now I have some nice specularity throughout my animation. Okay, that's quite good. So next thing, we want to create some particles. And therefore I will use trap code particular. So let's type in particular. And oh, I forgot, I have to create a solid first, of course. So select our composition, Ctrl Y, call it particles, and make it green. Comp size, drag it on top of our 3D layer, and now put on a particle system. So I want to set up the emitter, and I want this to be a box emitter, and I want the particle emitter to emit 25 particles per second, and the size should be 2000 times 2000 times 2000. So just a few particles, and I want to have a little bit of a pre-run, so you have to click emission extras and set the pre-run to 10, because I also want particles to be emitted in the beginning, so I have to even increase this, you know, like 100. Better. Yes. And now I will go to my particle setup and I will take the color of my logo or my typography here. So I want this to be approximately the same color. And I want them to be, let's say, a little bit bigger, maybe 10, and with some variation. Oh, it's a little bit too big, huh? So let's set it to 7. Good. And I want them to live about 4 seconds, so it's not too hectical, you know. And I also want some shading to happen because I want the particles to give the scene more depth. That's why I'm using them. So I have to turn on my shading. And now you can see that the particles that are near a light are well lit, they are bright, and the other ones are dark, and that's exactly what's creating the depth and gives us the feel of a better 3D environment here. So I want to change this a little bit. So let's say I want to increase the nominal distance here, but that's too much. I think about 700. And I want to decrease the ambient, so the ambient is the general lightness, and I want to decrease the diffuse. What I'm doing here is I want the particles near the lights to be really bright and the other ones to be really dark. So I just change this a little bit here. And let's say 25. And just take a quick look at the animation. I think it's pretty good. Let's see what's happening when we increase this a little bit, decrease it. I think the 600 is good. Okay, that's the particles, but we have a problem here. When you scroll through the animation, you will see that all the particles are now in front of my elements, like here, for example, and here. And we don't want this because the particles should be behind my elements, at least the particles that are far away in set space. So what are we going to do? We have to somehow split our particle system. And we can do this through the visibility options of Trapcode Particular. So first of all, let me just duplicate my particles and move one behind my elements. And I will call these particles front, and I will call these particles back. And I just want to disable the back for now and deal with the front. And therefore I go to my visibility options here, and you see I have all these values. So I want the near vanish to be between 1 and 10. This is perfect for me. But I want to change the far start fade because I want this to fade in front of my graphic in motion title. And we know already the value we need here because my camera positioning set is -711. And so the distance between, I will show you this in the horizontal view because it's better. The distance between my camera and my title is exactly 711 pixels. And we want the particles to be visible in this area, the front particles. So let's go to our particles window and go to our visibility settings. And let's say we want them to start to fade kind of close to our title. So let's say at 680. And we want them to vanish at 700. And if you take a look at our particles here now, you see that the background particles are gone. So in fact, there are just a few foreground particles left. And that's pretty cool. Maybe I will increase the amount a little bit, you know, that's something that we can see something. Okay. And now I will do the same with my background particles. So I will enable them and disable my front, and I will go to the visibility here and same procedure, but this time I want the particles to be visible in the back area here. So I will change my near vanish point, and it should start to vanish at about 720. So this is behind my title. And the near fade, let's say 750. And now if you take a look at our view here, you can see that all these particles, let's see, are behind my elements now. So if we take a close look at this one here, you see that it is disappearing behind, and all the others here too, you know, here in this area. And that's exactly what we want, because this creates some more depth. So let's turn on our front particle, and now we have our front and our back particles. And this is a small effect, but you know, it really creates the depth that I want to have in this animation. It helps us to create a 3D depth. And another thing I want to change quickly is the motion of the particles. I forgot to do this in the beginning. I want to set the velocity to 0, and I just want to have some kind of a motion to the top of our composition. So I will set the gravity to -3, and I will do the same for my background particles. So set the velocity to 0 and just give it a little bit of a negative gravity so that they rise to the top slowly, like with some floating in the air or whatever. Okay, so another thing we want to do is to create some flares, and these flares should interact with our 3D elements here. So create a new layer, Ctrl Y, call it flares, select a nice color for our flares, orange or whatever. Make comp size and press OK. Make this orange too, and just put it, let's say, it doesn't matter really, but on top of the particles. And now we'll take the Optical Flares plugin. Again, a very nice plugin from Video Copilot. By the way, I really have to thank Andrew Kramer for all its work. You know, in the times when I got started with After Effects, he really helped me a lot, and I really learned a lot. And I just love to use his plugins. So I can recommend to check out videocopilot.net and buy Andrew Kramer stuff, because it is awesome. So what I did is to change the render mode from on black to on transparent. And now I just want to use my lights to create my flares. So I can go to the source type here and just change it from 2D to track lights. And it will automatically create 3D flares that track with my lights. You can see this is my key light here, which is blue, and this is my background light, which is kind of yellow. Maybe I will change the color later on a little bit. But for now, we have to stylize our optical flare here. So go to the options and go to motion graphic presets. If you have this extension, you can also, of course, create your own or just use the normal presets. And I will select this one, let's say Sector Golden. Looks quite cool because something's happening here, you know. I like it. But what I do not like so much is the color of this flare here. So I probably will go into my backlight and press AA and change it to a little bit of a white. Yeah, that looks better to me. So the other one, this is nearly a little bit too blue. No, too white. So I go to my key light, press AA, maybe give it a little bit more color. Yeah, better. So let's take a look how this works. I think it works nicely. It creates a nice specularity and looks really cool. Okay, the only problem is that our flares do not interact with our 3D objects. You can see it here. Normally the flare should disappear when the object passes him in front, but you see it doesn't do that. And I really tried to play around with these things, you know. I know we need some kind of a matte here. We cannot create, I will show you, normally the optical flares has this option where you can define a foreground layer, and I will just show you this for now. Foreground layers. Let's say foreground layer number 1. And I say I want to have my element 3D layer. And what happens is that the flares disappear because optical flares is not aware of the alpha channel going on in the element 3D layer. And I try to play around with this. You know, I know that you can change the output setting of element 3D, for example, to something like this, you know, which is looks kind of a matte, kind of an alpha matte. And I tried to select this value and then change the sample method to Luma. And normally you think that it should work, you know. But in fact, it does not, you know. I really tried and I pre-composited it, everything, but it just didn't work. So the only thing you can do, I will set this to none and I will set this back to normal composite, is that you render an alpha matte. An alpha matte, or let's say, yes, an alpha matte for the Luma channel. And therefore we just solo our element layer, and be aware that you do this in the end of your animation when you are satisfied with your animation. Because if you change anything now in timing or the scattering of the elements, then you have to render this again, which is not a big problem because it renders really fast, as you will see in a moment. So let's do this, you know. Let's go to our composition and add to render queue. And now I will set up that I have QuickTime and format should be to PNG, and the quality can be really low because it's just a matte, so we don't need much quality here. I set it to 25. And now I want to have only the alpha channel, that's important. And I will go to my render settings and I will just take this because I can replace this. I already rendered this before. So put the render and you see how fast this renders, and I'm using a 6-core machine here. So 12 virtual cores, and I used the setup that all the 12 virtual cores work on one frame, so I do not use the multiple frame rendering. And you see, what do we have here? About not even 30 seconds, so that's quite good. Let's go back to our main comp, let's unsolo our 3D element layer and import my element flares matte here, and just drag it on top here, and you will see it matches my motion perfectly. And now I just want to disable it because I don't want it to be visible. I just need it as a reference for my optical flares. And now I can tell him foreground layers is my matte, and we want to sample the Luma, and suddenly the magic is happening. As you can see already, now if my flare moves behind a 3D object, let's search for a frame where this happens. Like here, it disappears. Like the 3D element is in front of our flare. And this is also another effect that creates more depth. And, you know, just creates this nice 3D environment. Okay, last but not least, I want to add more depth to this by just enabling depth of field in my camera settings. So I will go to a frame where I have really foreground, background elements, go to my cam setups, press AA, and enable depth of field. And let's see, I need more aperture here, so let's set it to 50. That's a little bit too much. Let's set it to 40. And this is quite nice. And yeah, now we are more or less finished with our animation. So you see that maybe my key light has a bad position because it really disturbs our title here. So I will just set this position to a little bit of a higher or lower value, whatever, a higher value like this is better. And another thing you can do is to add some glow to your element 3D layer. So take glow and put it on our layer and just change the settings a little bit. So increase the radius maybe to, let's say, 50, decrease the intensity to 2.4 or 2.5. I just want some areas to glow, and I don't want to use original colors. I want to use A and B colors, and I just want to set my A color to something like this and my B color to white, or let's say a little bit more yellow. And maybe sets the threshold just that the more lit parts glow a little bit, you know, like this. Well, so now let's create a very fast preview render. I will just make it in half resolution. So meanwhile, I can recommend you to visit my homepage. If you need some After Effects templates, motion graphic elements, or some free stuff, and my tutorials, then visit www.graphicinmotion.com. I thank you very much for watching this tutorial. I hope that you like it. And as a final step, we will now take a look at what we created. And you see a really nice 3D environment with nice depth and nice lights. And of course, you can download the source file to this tutorial on my homepage, so be sure to check out the link in the description area. And thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.